haven't had a chance to ask that question.
All right, so after asking that question, there's no public forum. Okay, no one wishes to address the board. Consent agenda, 3 items on there. Anybody like to discuss anything in particular? Otherwise, we'll look for a motion to approve.
I move that we approve the consent agenda, items number 1, 2, and 3.
I second that.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, staff items. What's up?
Board, if you could let me talk about item number 1, presentation and information regarding the SFD bond election. Gabriel and I will be tag teaming a PowerPoint presentation in a moment, but you did receive both a frequently asked questions regarding the bond and a SFD by the numbers. Those are 2 items that we put together to be able to utilize as the Sedona Fire District, factual information to help people that might have questions about the bond and find Sedona Fire personnel out and about that might have a question. These have been vetted by the attorney and are compliant with any of the requirements that we are to remain neutral in any of our presentations and things like that to any of our, we just have to present facts, and that's what all that is the facts.
Where are these?
Where are those?
Yeah, where can they be found?
They're nowhere yet. They're only in our possession, but they will be public after tonight. If you have no questions or objections, I know that Mr. Soto had called about 1 item under the call volume, so we might be able to work on better wording some of that, so that'll just be semantics in that how many calls does Sedona Fire District respond to, and that was really just trying to explain that we have the 43 to 4,500 calls a year that we respond to, but we respond to 5,200 actual responses by all the stations, back to some of the concerns people have with, well, Station 6 only went to 225 calls or whatever. They really went to 711, and so it helps kind of explain that, or try to explain that better was the intent. So I don't know if there's any other specific questions Mr. Soto has.
Chief, just how is it exactly that the public is going to be able to receive these?
We'll have this on our website under there's a tab now called bond information, so that'll be under there, will be where it will get put. It'll be in the minutes, so you'll see that as well attached to the minutes. And then we'll have some on the fire trucks and things like that, so if people are at the grocery store or wherever and someone asks a question about the bond or how does it work, they can hand them the sheet, and it's just, that's how it works. And if they have further questions, they can direct them towards me or whoever is appropriate for the question.
Thank you.
Chief Kazian, just a question. As we move forward with this, is there going to be any educational presentations to community service groups?
Yes, there will. Right now, there is some groups that have been requested our attendance to speak to their specific group. We've spoken to a couple Rotary groups already, and Kiwanis Club, things like that already. And then we'll be looking to get the Big Park Regional Council in September. We'll be talking to them. And any HOAs that may have an interest, please contact me. Any service groups that would like us to come out, a small group of residents, citizens that are having a question, I'm happy to meet with 1 or 20 or 100 of them. We'll have a nice open discussion where we can meet and have a back and forth discussion. We're looking for those people that would like to be more informed.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about those two pieces of paper? And I'll move on to my PowerPoint.
Chief, I have a quick question. Do we have any plans to leave any of these informational piece of information at the Sedona Public Library for people to?
I was definitely thinking I was going to do that for sure. No, yes, if that makes sense and they're willing to put it there and it's legally compliant, that we can do that. Either on their abilities or ours, there may be reasons people may or may not want that, but if there's opportunities to get them into any place that makes sense, we'll be looking for those and making that happen.
Yeah, it's not uncommon for cities to do that, put their budgets because a lot of people come to the library, and that would be a good way for them to get
Correct.
educated.
And we do post our budgets, a budget book at the libraries as well. That we do have that there. And when the village is still
Right.
up, we have one there as
Right,
well.
right.
So
Okay.
we cover both corners.
Okay, thanks.
And Chief, has there been any thought given to mailing it out to our citizens?
That we'd have to talk with the attorney and where that is, and the expense of that would be. We're doing a voter pamphlet. I'm sorry, not a voter pamphlet. A voter card, we just got the bill for that to send a little postcard as required by law, was $3,500 to mail that postage out, and that's on a card at a, I don't know, so we could look into it if there's a desire. I'm not sure that we're at that point where we should, would, or could. I can certainly investigate that if that's a direction you'd like me to look at. We don't have a budget for that. There are some line items that we probably won't use in the bond piece, I think, but
My only thinking is that because this is going to be a mail-in ballot as opposed to people either early voting or going to a polling place, everybody will be getting the pamphlet in the mail accompanying the ballot. So I just wondered if it might be helpful, and they're making a decision that they have this, but if the cost is that large, that would be a problem.
it would be at least that large. You're going to have the envelopes. So if they're mailing they're mailing 13,000 postcards. So you just have to figure the 13,000, the printing, the envelopes. You're gonna have that additional charge, the stuffing, the labeling, all that type of stuff. So there's a name for that. I forgot. It's sorting or. Anyway, if there's a desire, I can definitely look into it. I don't know if the legality of that. I mean, it's factual information. I don't know why you couldn't do it. So you just give me some direction, and I'll do what the board's pleasure is, if there is such. We'd have to take some direction today on that because our next meeting isn't until September. So if you want, we could do it then too, but it's going to be awfully close. Ballots will be going out, and
You'd need legal advice from the bond council before we could even entertain doing that.
correct.
So I don't know.
I can't see why it wouldn't be legal. If the document's legal, why you wouldn't be able to mail it being legal. I don't know if there's really an illegality of it, but there could be, of course. And I wasn't prepared for that question, so I'm sorry.
This was just an inquiry
Okay.
at this point.
Okay, thank you for the inquiry. I'll inquire on the other side so we know if it is possible and have that in the queue if there was a need. Because I suppose at the next board meeting, if there was a need or an interest by a board, we could have that kind of ready to launch, and there's still time at the September. The ballots will go out October, like mid-October. So, there would be time to get that out, I would think, so.
Chief, perhaps even a savings to that degree would even be more of an insert in the Red Rock News or the village newspaper where they have over there, if that is feasible.
Exactly. There's
Using somebody else's.
different options.
Yeah. So,
We can put it on our Facebook page. We can do a whole bunch of different stuff. So we'll see what we can do to continue to promote that information, but staying on that line. And it's critical that we walk that line. With that, I'd like to do a power. Do we have a clicker at all or no? No? Okay. I'm fine with that. You just blind board member Soto? There it is. Okay. Okay, board. I'm gonna grab you a microphone, Gabe. I'm gonna switch between Gabe and Gabriel depending on how I feel. Okay, so I just wanted to get a chance to talk to you a little bit about looking at the numbers of Sedona Fire District. And so with that, things we've talked about before, but as we move through some of the challenges here, like how to work the clicker. Probably go like 6 people at a time. All right, we'll just go this way. Old school. So looking at our sustainability and that citizen advisory group that we talked about and the staff who's worked to develop a potential plan for meeting the capital needs of the Sedona Fire District. That's really what's brought us here today. The question of the bond that you have approved back months ago in June and where we find ourselves going forward is really to provide these facts. So we're really here making this information available to the public solely in the interest of making sure the public is fully informed and has access to factually correct information prior to the election. That is really what all this is about. So I want to remind everybody a little quickly about what that $17.9 million bond and the remaining capital projects that we talked about and where all those numbers kind of fit. So at the end of the day, we do have a 28.466252 10-year capital grand plan total that we're looking to fund and need to do. and funding 17.9 of that via
Just
a
the other
bond.
thing, Chief, real quick on this is the importance in understanding that this is a plan. And in addition to bond funding and funding through the levy, you know, the district's always still looking at other opportunities through grants and other ways of paying for these items needed.
Yeah, and I guess to cap on that, or to bounce off of that as well, this is what we've laid out through the plan for the next 10 years. Things change over a 10-year time period. And so we're constantly monitoring that, and needs may shift, priorities may change. But as we see it today, that's what we're looking at going forward. And so that's where that plan is. You've seen lots of that. This is just, we talked about this last month a little bit, the call statistics between each station. Back to my comment earlier on the how does SFD respond. So you see in that first column, station number 1 call volume is, that first red bar is, 1,800 and some calls. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I'm sorry for that. But that number, that's the number of calls that actually happen in that still district. That's the number you would see on the annual report. But when you look at that actual, the green line on the right, they actually responded to just over 1,500 calls. Because when they were busy on some of those calls, other stations had to come to run their calls, or they had to go to other stations' calls. Does that make sense? So 1,800 something, whatever, I don't know what that number is, in their still district, and only responded to 1,500 and so of those. And that yellow bar is actually the number of units that responded. So you can see how many units responded out of station 1, almost 2,400 the units that responded. So if 2 went on a call, that's 2. If 2 more went, that's 4. Does that make sense where we're coming from? So you can see through there that station number 6 is one that we seem to talk a lot about. And we had this is the fiscal year statistics. So there was 200 and I think it was 25 or 217, I forget what that number was, of actual calls within station number 6's still district. But look at their green bar. They went to 711 calls from station number 6 with almost 900 units. So it's just a graphical representation of what I talked about last year, or last meeting, I believe. And we wanted to just show that again for the folks that like the pictures better, because it's sometimes easier to see. Gabe?
So one of the things we wanted to represent is where money's gone. I don't think this is working either. One thing we wanted to show is where the money's gone since fiscal year 2012 to not only last fiscal year, but where we're budgeting. And what we see in through fire districts and fire departments throughout the state and country is predominantly 75 to 85% of costs are in personnel, and the remaining expenses are in capital, overhead, and other items. And as you can see for Sedona Fire District, over the last 5 years and then into the FY18 budget, the personnel cost of total expenses has averaged around 74% in that period of time. It's not jumped above that at any point in the last 5 years. And then the orange bar, and why we're here today even discussing kind of these items, is capital. As you could see, back in 2012, capital funding was relatively low. And only as we've continued on to the last really 3 years did funding to capital really increase and improve. But what is interesting to see is how much kind of the district's overhead or other expenses has been cut since 2012 to now, which shows, again, that although personnel costs have gone up as a percentage over this trend, we are seeing our other costs of doing business going down, meaning that the organization's found more efficient ways of doing things and reducing those costs for services outside of personnel. And here's just kind of, again, looking at other revenue sources, what the district's done since actually 2008 to last fiscal year in wildland revenue and expenses. And over that 10-year period, it's netted additional $1 million in revenue. So revenue after expenses. And the one thing that $1 million doesn't account for, and you can't put a financial value on it, is the skills and training our personnel have gotten through those deployments and through those experiences. So in addition to that, we have covered our costs, and above and beyond covering our costs, netted $1 million. So again, some significant benefits of wildland. But in some ways, though, one thing Wildland does is it does skew our personnel cost numbers. And that's what kind of this next slide's going to illustrate.
Before we move that next slide, I mean, you see those last 2 years and where we're at, and these are fiscal years, right? So we seem to be trending already just 6 weeks into this new fiscal year. We've got guys out all over the place right now because it's a lot of stuff on fire. Probably more the norm where we're seeing things, at least for a while. And you can see how low it was in 9, 10, 11, 12, and how different it looks in 13 and beyond. 15 was a slow year. We didn't even make our budgeted number for wildland revenue that year. It's the only year we haven't done that, at least since I've been around, but usually by far we beat it. And that's $55,000 a year in revenue. And so we didn't meet it that year, but all the other years we did, and we have by far. And that $1 million of additional revenue over those 10 years is money that we are able to use to fund our operation that's not being paid for by the Sedona Fire District residents. It's being paid for at the federal government or state land or BIA land or wherever it is. So.
And the only other thing to show, too, is really the last 2 years, you see that margin on essentially the profitability of wildland increased significantly, which shows in the previous years, it was more or less probably single resources or personnel going out. And as we get to the later years, we're now having equipment going out, which is really where the organization makes its revenue from or profits from.
Probably the last 2 years mostly is probably the EMS teams going out, and the invention of Fireline Medic is probably where we're really seeing the most impact to that. The fires have something to do with it too. We sent an engine to Washington, almost to Canada, for a Type 1 engine for, I think we had 2, they extended the crew on that one. So that's a lot of money to be made on something like that. But I think Gabe's point of that spread being much different, we're trying to really focus on that spread quite a bit more, because that's where the money for the community is really put back in here. Wear and tear on trucks occurs. There's lots of stuff that occurs that, that $1 million gets spent on as well. So.
What we're kind of representing here is just kind of where we fall in line with personnel expenses compared to budget. And as you can see across, and like the chief didn't have the number on the call volume, I don't have the exact numbers on these, but as you can see, the personnel costs in comparison to total budget, the variance between the two among Sedona, Central Arizona, and Verde Valley is relatively close. Verde Valley, although is a smaller margin, they've also got a much smaller budget, and so that would be expected with smaller operating budget and capacity. And similar again here, and basically cost per employee. As you can see again, the margin between the two is comparable across all three entities, which again shows that, and also leaning into my experience working throughout the state, is Sedona's costs and the allocation of expenses is not out of the norm. It's very much within the norm of an organization, of a professional fire organization in the country, really. So we just wanted to develop a slide or a graph that kind of illustrates that, but more so looking at us compared to our neighboring partners than looking at a much global or broader look.
And I guess what I'd like to just say about this, when you compare us to other folks, which is a very important overlay to make, there's lots of different variables that come into to comparing folks. When I look at these comparisons, cost per employee, so there's a salary, so that's one way we can measure people up, just straight up base pay. Then we look at things when you say wages and benefits. Now you start talking about things like the pension costs. So what is our pension percentage compared to somebody else? So when you compare us at 34% for our pension tier 1 and 2 folks, we could compare us to, say, Prescott, who's got a 90%. So the numbers are going to be skewed. They're doing the same job, but they're firefighters. If you pay them $1, it's costing 90 cents to go in the pension, right? So the wage benefit numbers got to be completely different. So for the taxpayer, they probably don't care. But understand that they're doing the same job, and so someone else in these groups or wherever you compare us to might have a pension cost of 15%. If their workers' comp is in there, well, it is in there, and their workers' comp, if they have a safe organization or they don't have a safe an organization, they'll be paying much higher worker comp fees. Doesn't mean the employee really gets a salary that they can chew on. It's just the cost of employment for those people. You throw in things like FICA and the different things, that the healthcare costs and stuff. And I think about where we're at with the healthcare costs that we've contained over the last just 2 years with the reductions. Could you imagine if we didn't have those, where we'd be with 5 or 10% increases compounding over 2 years? So all the numbers are different. These are great things to look at and compare to, and they're great opportunities to speak. Why is our number here and why is theirs there? What can we be doing different or better? That's a great conversation to have all the time. But it's hard to look at one of those bars and say, well, look where you are and look where they are, so you must be doing something wrong. You got to really drill down way deeper than that. And so it's just a snapshot to show us where we are and how we compare, and the difference in the two, the salary piece and things like that. I think an interesting part of that, when I look at the cost also, Betty ran a report from the other day. Through fiscal 17, or for the year time period in fiscal 17, our 10-year employee, 11.85 years of employment. So we retain our employees. That's a pretty good retention, a tenure rate. I mean, for public sector, probably there's a lot of people that hang on and work on these jobs. But when you look at that, again, I could overlay that over somebody else, and if their average tenure is 3 years or 6 years, those folks are going to make less money. They haven't, run through the. Does that make sense? So does it mean that they're better or worse? It's just a snapshot in time where that's at. So it's a complex situation that we could talk about for days if we really wanted to, but I don't want to. This is a comparison.
Yeah, this just breaks out our cost per position. I believe we went over this with the board last month. So it just breaks out again, showing where our average pay is based on position, and where, when you add in again that wildland factor, while it does generate us revenue, it does increase our personnel costs. Understanding that those increased personnel costs are reimbursed by the state. But this again shows kind of a little clearer picture of where our employees are from an average pay standpoint, just based on their regular overtime versus wildland deployment overtime, and how much of a jump there is in some of those categories. You could see is, battalion chiefs, average base pays $110,000. But when you get to out of district overtime, now we're at $150,000. And so understanding that those will skew the numbers, but the majority of what's causing those numbers to be skewed are reimbursed expenses, essentially based on their deployments. So,
Are there any questions on that? That's just a critical talking point for folks and understanding where we're at and how we get to the numbers. That one you?
What I just wanted to do, and you guys have seen this graph before in our budget presentations, is just showing where the red line represents the assessed value, and the kind of orange or yellowish line is the mill rate. And what we've seen is, as the assessed value dropped, the tax rate dropped. and so instead of keeping it level, decisions were made to lower the tax rate during that period of time, and then causes the big jump and the big spike when now the funds were depleted, and the need to raise the tax rate was to bring in the revenue to cover the expenses was required. And then we see that big jump and that big spike in our mill rate as compared to growing with our assessed value.
And you said level. It really however it needs to fluctuate. It wouldn't necessarily could have or should have stayed level. It just should have bobbed up and down to where it needed to go to get us. And you'll see in a minute what that bobbing opportunity is and was. But I think it makes a lot of sense, in my mind anyway, that there's an inverse relationship, right? If AV goes down, the multiplier goes up. There's some folks that might believe that, well, if the AV is going down, then maybe your AV or your mill should stay the same, or should whatever. At the end of the day, the operations costs are what the operation costs are, and that's what you as a board have been charged to do, is to help create and approve that budget, and that the staff puts together. And short of discussion points on what we could or should have done, we are where we are today, and the concern would be that line at the rate that it's going, right? The 325 cap is in place, and so we just want to make sure that we understand there's a direct relationship there, and you see it. The mill goes up as the AV goes down. I think the other key point is that top bar in fiscal 10. That AV was $803 million, and in 18 is $538 million. So and everything in between that, right, is lower. So all those years of lost potential, if the mill rate had been wherever it was, if those rates had stayed the same and not dropped so much. So you're playing catch up to try to be able to provide services to our community. It's just a math situation. That there's no other way around that. And I think sometimes people really look at that mill rate as, are we doing it right? Are we doing it wrong? Look where our mill rate's at. That's some measurement of effectiveness. I think you said that before, Gabe, and it's not. It's more a factor of the math.
So one of the things that we did is we did kind of an analysis on where the mill rate should have been historically. And this is looking at not only taking into account the decrease in AV that we just discussed on the previous slide, but this is also looking at actually having back in 2008 a comprehensive capital improvement plan and funding that capital improvement plan through today. And unfortunately, our analysis couldn't even out the mill rate. So you would, where we see the kind of the big spike and then the drop down, you'd see more of a leveling in the real world. But really what I want to illustrate and show is, had we paid for the capital needs and not spent fund balance in the past, our tax rate would have been higher in the last 5 years, 6 years than what it really was. So all we're doing, and what this illustrates, is all we've done is we've, artificially kept costs down at the sacrifice of fund balance and improvements. And now's the time that we're, catching up. And as you can see, why 18 kind of intersects is because 18 was a year that we developed the budget to start meeting these needs and start addressing these needs. And that's why that retrospective, when you look at the retrospective look, you see that intersection there at FY18. And so it really shows that you would have either paid for it in the past or we're going to pay for it in the future. Either way, these capital projects and the district's financial needs are there, whether it was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, or whether it's here today for the next 10 years forward.
It's probably important to know we did have actually a capital plan back in 2007-8. We were talking about the Citizen Advisory Committee that talked about many of the things that the Citizen Advisory Committee talked about in 2017. We had a recession in there. Some things happened. Decisions were made. It is, what it is. But here we are now. We can always good to look back and see what you could have done, but showing what you would have had to have done to make all that happen, and where we went. At least we were in the right trajectory of where we were trying to go, even if it was not as fun as you'd like it to make. And Corey, you had a question?
Yes, well, a comment that that is why the fact that we didn't have money to spend on capital items is why we have so many capital items that we need to address now. And that's how the Citizens Committee found so many, is because we weren't able to take care of maintenance or even some important structural modifications then.
So I did some research the other day. I was looking at it. I called Tricia, because sometimes my eyes get a little funny. I think I'm just seeing things. The capital for many years, 2003, 4, 5, whatever those numbers were, but before ago, there were $400,000 what the capital budgeted items were back then. And in the last couple of years that I've been fortunate enough to be here, the average is like 860 or something like that we've been. So we've almost doubled what we were putting in capital, and we're still behind. And so that's that. Remember that bridge we kept talking about? I guess it's just an analogy. Will keep coming back. We've been trying to bridge to get where we got to go. You're going to see in a minute a slide where if we really wanted to go where we should have been was like 1.6 million. And you'll see that slide, what that would have looked like and where taxes would have been in a second. So it just illustrates we're going the right direction and trying to be as gentle as possible along the way, but responsive to our purpose and mission.
The question I have for you is that when we see these trends happening and the assessed value is starting to drop, and in order to meet our operational obligations, we tend to increase the mill rate to meet those. Is there a point where we start realizing the need for some sort of reduction in budget across the board, as in a 10% exercise for everybody type of thing?
Gabe, you want to start with that, or you want me to?
Yeah, I'll start with that. Yeah, of course, if there's a difference between a dip that we see that we anticipate coming back versus that point where there's no foreseeable relief in the future. And that's when you have to look at, do we absorb the impact through a change in rate? Or is it something that there has to be longer term planning done and there has to be cuts made? And obviously the recession was kind of that time where people, were looking, what should we do? But if we look at our spending really didn't decrease very much. We just stopped taking money from the taxpayer and started funding the budget with reserve funds.
So and so further, we have these dialogues with labor. Hey, here's where we're trending. Here's where we're going. We got to do some things. We got to work through whatever we're seeing. And certainly there's a large respect for where the mill rate is. We all know where the cap is at, and where we're approaching on the trend lines, right? But for the staff in the labor group to meet and talk about what the long-term plan and sustainability options are is really important for us. And we have that conversation. We've been maturing in that way greatly, I would say, over the years, if I can say that. There's Ed's here. I don't know if there's anyone else really from the labor. Mike's here too. And certainly the admin folks as well. I don't want to cut them out, but the large majority of our people are on the operations side. And so we have those dialogues. And we owe it to the citizens to make sure we're doing it in a sustainable manner. And I can tell you in the last 5 years that I've been here, and the 6 budgets I've done, that's a laser focus that I have all the time. The difficulties become the whole system as a whole. It's moving, and so we changed insurances. That wasn't real easy back when we did that in 2013. It was my decision basically in the middle of the night. I got this quote after we got done doing our negotiation. I said, we're changing insurance. I said, we already agree. I said, I don't care, we're changing insurances. And we did that, and it created opportunities for us to save a lot of money going forward. And policies and procedures and benefits and all that stuff, it's all happening. So did I answer that question? And the last thing I want to say about that, I guess, is that we have a zero-based budget. We don't go back. My philosophy is that we do not go, hey, you got this much money this year, we're going to kick it up 3%, 4%, or it's really you have zero. Now, why do you need a number? And we talk about that, and we have to justify all that coming in instead of saying, well, here's where you were, here's where you spent, here's where you should have spent, here's what I think you should have done. It's justify everything and all the budgets. Hey, I think we can get a better copy lease. Go get a better copy release, than we got, or whatever it is, and go find a better turnout price, or go, whatever we're doing. And we have those exercises in the budgeting process, so that we're coming with as lean as possible. And I always tell the story that I grew up in a budgeting world where it was like, if you didn't spend your money, you don't get it next year. That's not the environment that we have, that I have. Where, hey, if you didn't spend it, so at the end of the year, everyone spends their money, so they at least go, hey, chief, I spent 100%, now I need more, and they just bought stuff to buy stuff. That's not how we operate at all. It is very wise, and every purchase order comes through us to get approved and everything, so pretty tight processes in place, and certainly not very fun at budget time when you say, you got to go through this exercise again? Yep. So, hope that makes sense.
It does, thank you.
So I'll talk about this. This is the median home price. So you can't see those black numbers very well in the brown, but Gabe made those, so I'll go with Gabriel now. The hard part is, folks, and we didn't go back. If you went back even further into 6 and 5 and 4 and 3, you see that trend. It would be kind of work its way up to its peak and then work its way down. You can see from the 2012 to 13 budget right in there somewhere. Is where we just pretty much been going up, which is the exact same slide that Gabe just showed you a minute ago. That's the mill rate, the red line, that's going up just like he showed you. But and then the numbers of the homes. So that home in the middle at 1112 is like 485, if I'm not mistaken. And then we're looking at a $920 price for a median home in Sedona Fire District, and a lot of folks talk about how that's a really big increase. There's 2 things you got to think about there. One is the median home price in 11-12 might be completely different than what it is in 17-18. I don't know, Gabe. I'm putting you on the spot. Do you have any idea what that is?
Pretty sure it's around like 386,000. 17-18, I don't remember what 11-12 was.
Oh, yeah, definitely close to 380 or 360, somewhere in there for now. But I'm guessing it was considerably lower. So, of course, if you have a higher value home, we just went through a big recession, lost huge AV, and we've gained a bunch back. You're going to see different. We're also taxing right now on the lower on the secondary, right? We used to tax on the primary. So there's, again, some differences there. I just want to show that to you, and you're going to see a couple slides here. So this is the median home price. So remember 485 and remember 920, okay? Those are two we'll just look at right there. So the next slide is going to show you, if we would have taken Gabe's example before, what we could have done, if we would have funded the $1.6 million worth of capital every year, going back to fiscal 08, is that?
Oh, wait, yeah.
This is the trajectory we would have had. So if you said it was 485, that budget, oh, this is terrible, Gabe. I can't see that. That's only 507, I think it says there. So 607, I'm sorry, to the 600. And it's at 920 on the last one. Why is that number should be supposed to be?
No, it's the same.
Oh, because it matches. That lined up. That's
Goes
right.
16, 17.
So you go back to 10, 11 in 17, 841. If you look at fiscal 17, that's 841 to 10, 11. And then your taxes would have went down. Could anyone believe that could have happened? Could you believe that your taxes would have went down in 14, 15? But the mill rate went up. Look how high the mill rate went. Look at all that stuff. So this is the mathematical equation that Gabe and I are talking about, that things are the relationship. Your taxes could have went up and down and fluctuated if we would have done that. What's interesting about that number, if you add up that 10 years worth of property tax that would have been either was paid in the first example or would have been paid in this one, you would have paid $1,000 more, $1,100. I left a piece of paper upstairs. $1,100 more in taxes over that 10-year period, about $111 a year. We're now looking at talking about a bond that's going to cost the median home about $82 a year. Gabe said earlier, you could pay for it before and been paying for it along the way. We didn't. We're looking at doing a bond and paying for it over the next 20 plus years, and where that's going to be. The needs are the needs are the needs. We had a recession. Decisions were made at board level, staff level, and we reduced those prices. We looked what this happened, right? We looked and we reduced. Now we're in the upslide, and that's not very fun for a lot of people. We get that. But that's the history. Any questions on that? So Gabe, this is yours.
Yeah, so this last slide, what it does is it kind of puts the break-even tax levy analysis over what the projected, the historical fire district levy, and then the projected levy with the bond on a $500,000 assessed value property. And you can see, again, in the past, the taxes would have actually been higher than what was received. But then as we go from this year forward, you still would have seen kind of that spike up, whereas we're seeing that gradual increase. And so I think what this shows is whether we did it now or we did it later, again, you would be paying for it. And there's nowhere where the analysis that we've done would show it would have been cheaper to do it back 5 years ago, 6 years ago, versus doing it now going forward. In fact, most of the analysis shows the method and the way we're going about it now is actually more cost effective than it would have been in the past, because of the use of the bond allows us to level out that cost over a longer period of time.
So this is on a $500,000 home. We just picked the $500,000 home. We could have picked any number, but we picked that. And so you can just see where that tax would have been in 2014. It would have been up to almost $1,500 on that year. Does that make sense where that line is, what that line means? That's where that top of the red bar would have been if we would have been funding all that capital along the way. Instead, we have the bars in the orange that illustrate what would happen if the bond is passed and how the funding of that bond would affect that home. And you can see not until year 2027 does the bond payment plus taxes exceed where we would have been if we would have been funding the capital all the way along. Does that, you guys are smart, you get it, okay.
I just want to say, though, that while in terms of numbers, it's better to use our current way, it would have been perhaps helpful to have bought these things when money could have bought more. Inflation isn't
Right.
being taken into account here.
We did a little bit of analysis, and it did show some increasing, but the other cost that isn't factored into the stuff we're talking about today and looking at is that wear and tear cost, that maintenance cost that has increased as the equipment and the fleet has aged and stations have aged, there's been a higher cost put in on maintenance where there could have been some more savings had things been replaced when they should have been replaced. But we didn't do an in-depth analysis on that piece. What I want to show here is our cost per FTE and really show, this is kind of going to lead into how our personnel have been compensated in relation to inflation or consumer price index. But before that, I want to illustrate the cost. This is a cost per FTE. The red bar is representing their salaries and wages. Orange is taxes and benefit. Yellow is retirement plans. And then the blue is the wildland. So you can see from 07-08 to last fiscal year, it's gone from an average of just under 100,000 per FTE to just under 120,000. So that's only a $20,000 increase over almost 10-year period or 10-year period. So when we look at that, and I'll put those to inflation numbers here in a minute, but what we see is we're not seeing massive fluctuations between benefit costs and salaries and wages. In fact, they've all maintained a fairly equal relationship or ratio. If anything, we've actually decreased some of our benefit costs as we've moved forward in the years. Now, obviously, retirement costs have gone up, and that piece has gotten larger. But as the chief mentioned earlier, making the decision to change health insurance plans and making decisions to save money has caused this relationship to actually maintain and not get out of skew. And there's been a lot of things that's kind of helped benefit that. If not, we would be seeing much higher cost per FTE in these later years if the district didn't do anything.
Is that a pretty good graphical representation of where we are, where we've been? Thank you.
So when we looked at the consumer price index here on the top line from 09 to 17 and basically the change in cost per FTE from that same period, and this is total, this is wages and benefits, you could see the compound annual growth rate of inflation was 1.71%, and cost per FTE went up 1.85%. So we did increase at a rate higher than inflation for total cost per FTE. But if we go to the next slide, this shows that cost has not been going in salaries and wages. In fact, salaries and wages have been under the consumer price index over the last 10 years, over the last 9 years in comparison. So what we've seen is our cost per FTE has increased, yet the wages, the benefit, the take-home wages have actually been just under that. So a lot of the reasons why we see the wages, the overall cost increase is because there are things outside of our control. And that goes back to these conversations I've had in the past about healthcare costs. Although we did make some changes to see savings, those costs have still increased. The pension stuff is probably the biggest item that has impacted the previous slides numbers for not just Sedona Fire District, but the entire state. And so, again, when you look at this, you can see that we're not off, at all from the normal inflation. In fact, employees are being compensated just under what that is. And let's not use that for MOU discussion. But
Next.
but again, Sedona's not out of the norm at all.
Board, I want to talk to you about this graph here. It's colorful, beautiful. It's the FTE count. We thank Betty for going back and taking many, many hours to calculate all the FTEs that we had.
That's all it comes out to be, all that work.
Fiscal year 2007 to fiscal 17. You can see at the top in fiscal 09, we actually had a FTE count of 118.6, I think it was, but it was 118. You can see now at the end, that's the top blue line. The top blue line at the end right now is 92. Our FTE count is down considerably, 21% overall and 11.3 since I've arrived. Sometimes we talk about my arrival, and we just hired 4 people today. As I mentioned to you earlier, that's all replacement. We still have actually a vacancy, and maybe even, the numbers are down. That's the truth. That yellow line is the operations line. It's really important. You see that line is probably on an uptick fairly slightly from fiscal 13, right? It's not a dramatic trend, but it is inching upwards. In 2012, we were short 3 employees when I was hired. So we hired 3 people just to get up to the staffing that we were supposed to be at, that was on the books and on the record. That's why you see that first little spike. We added a fire station number 6. We tried to staff it without any additional personnel. We realized that was not feasible. And for the interest of public safety and for our operational needs to be able to operate in Station 6, we added 3 more bodies, 1 per shift. And that's where our staffing got to where we are now.
Chief, and on that, I think it's important to note that you guys hired a great outside firm to do an overtime analysis.
Oh, we did do that, right? In that period that we did do that.
That actually determined that it was more cost effective to hire the 3 additional FTEs than continue to provide the staffing through overtime. So it was, although you added more staffing, it was cheaper than continuing to use your existing staffing.
And then you can see the administrative staff, support staff, which is that kind of a teal line at the bottom. And you can see that being fairly, it came down from 09, but been fairly stagnant. So I think that paints a pretty good picture for where we are on employees and the growth of Sedona Fire District, especially in the last 6 years. Question?
Chief Gazian, this particular graph really tells an important story. This particular graph really tells an important story about the district for the last, since 2007. And to me, it's critical that this kind of information get out to the public, because this really is really telling. And is this presentation going to be available on the website?
I'll be signing copies afterward outside if you'd like to get a copy of your. Yes, it'll be on our website, of course. It'll be in the handouts. I've already emailed it to Tricia to include in the minutes, and wherever that may need to be, that's important. So yeah, it's interesting. I talked to a gentleman yesterday, a concerned citizen, and he was adamant that the fire district has just exploded in employees, and I shared this with him, and he's like, that's not what I believe to be true. And I'm like, well, the numbers are the numbers. And so, so Betty, you did the FTE count, right? So if we had a person here for 3 months and we had a vacancy for 3 months and we brought the next person in, I mean, that's how all those FTE count happen. Is that any more to add on that?
No, that's accurate. So if somebody was here just half a year and we didn't fill it, that was a half an FTE. So we just made sure we were very accurate every year with the comings and goings.
So when we talk about positions on the flow chart or on the org chart, right? There's bodies and boxes and things that get filled and don't get filled, and wherever they're at, we don't always have everything filled and things like that. But this year, right? Last year we lost a fleet maintenance supervisor. We did not replace that position. When our finance manager left, we did not replace that position. However, we just did add an administrative person who will be starting next week. You'll get to meet her next month to help in the administrative side, because there's just administratively, we cut too lean. If you look at some of those things, the stuff that's happening, we're missing a lot of things. The minute somebody goes on vacation, something happens, we are down to bare bones. And so we've decided that operationally it does not make sense. So we've added that person, and we've added an inspector to get with John, because we realize his stats and data are showing that we're not meeting the needs for the fire inspection. So this year we added 2 folks. We also have 2 folks that we didn't fill. So we're adding a position where, but operationally I think we're trending in the right spot, and we don't have a plethora of support staff for support staff. That's critical to understand. So anything else, Board Member Ernster, on that? I thank you for your.
No, thank you.
So Sedona Fire District's sustainable solutions, fiscally responsible and driven for efficiency. We have to continue this. This presentation is about the status of the bond and where we are, and I wanted to present you some numbers and facts about where we are as an agency. These are factual information we're providing to you to let you understand of where we sit as an agency, how we operate, and where we need to go in the future. I think that's pretty clear. Is there any questions about the presentation? I got 1 or 2 more pieces on the bond, and I will move on. No? So as the bond sits, the bond process sits, we had a deadline of last Friday to collect the pro and con statements for the Sedona Fire District bond election. I'm sorry, yeah, for the bond question for the voter information pamphlet. Remember, you guys voted to do the voter information pamphlet, so we had that process go out. We received 20 responses back. 5 folks responded with a con statement for the bond, and 15 people responded with a pro statement for the bond. State statute requires that any misrepresentations of the truth must be corrected. So we spent time with about 9 people, statements that were not factually true, and had to make sure they got corrected to be compliant with state law. Then this morning, we turned them all in, and they're going to translate them to Spanish as required. And they replied, by the way, we forgot to tell you that there is actually a requirement that there's no more than 10 statements, either pro or con. He goes, I forgot to tell you that, but we haven't had that happen since 1993. Was the last time they had more than 10 statements. So I didn't even think to tell you that. So we had to go through today and randomly select 10 pro statements. We had 5 con, 15. We pulled 10 numbers out of a hat, which correlated to numbers on a sheet, and we picked 10 folks that will get their pro statements, and the other 5 were notified as such, that they will not see their comments in the paper or in the pamphlet. The pamphlet, I talked about the card that's being mailed, so we just finished up, I think, the language for this postcard that goes out that says, hey, be on the lookout for a pamphlet for a bond coming from Sedona Fire District. That's like the first warning. Then there's the voter information pamphlet that will go out next in English and in Spanish. And then that'll be at the beginning of October. And then the middle of October, or thereabouts, I think the 11th to the 23rd, somewhere in there, the ballots have to be out to the voters. They'll get them and have to turn them back in by November 7th. They'll tabulate the votes on the 7th and determine whether or not the bond has a yes or no percentage, which one has a higher percentage. Is there anything else, Tricia, I'm missing on the status of where we're at on things? Okay. I think I covered the bond. Is there any questions on the bond itself or where we're at or what's happening? Okay. I will move on.
All right, thank you, Chief. So we got a couple purchase orders to go through. Who's doing those?
I'm doing them, I think. We'll see. All right. Item number 2, United Fire Equipment, $31,000. That's our uniform program that we do. It's an annual expense, and there's an allotment that's given for folks, and standard budgeted item. So,
Any questions or comments? Motion? I'll move to approve purchase order 11035 to United Fire Equipment, $31,000.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
next item, number 3, is purchase order 10854 to FDC Rescue Products, $27,670.80 for turnout gear. Again, part of our annual allotment of turnout gear. One of the things that we do very well here is have that scheduled every year annual replacement, so we don't have a large lump sum, very large purchase in 10 years. So it helps keep the stock rotating and the opportunity for keeping up with the newest in technology. So we have every year getting whatever the newest technology is for our turnout gear. And when I say technology and turnout gear, there's big improvements every year in turnout gear. Not every year, but frequently. There's lots of improvements in fabrics and standards and things like that. So it keeps us always moving towards the newest standards. So budgeted item, and every year we have that purchase order. Usually we do this in April, and the turnout gear takes forever to get. And so we're usually scrambling to get it by the end of the year. So we said, I want this on the agenda sooner. They won't be here for probably 120 days at least. But so Chief Cochran, I appreciate him getting this to us.
Okay, discussion or motion?
I'll make a motion. I move to approve purchase order number 10854 to FDC Rescue Products in the amount of $27,670.80 for 13 sets of structural firefighter personnel protective gear.
Second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Item number 4, purchase order 10613 to Braun Northwest in the amount not to exceed $141,000, including sales tax for refurbishment of an existing SFD ambulance. If you remember, we've been purchasing Braun Northwest ambulances over the last many years. The whole plan was to get to a point to where we could begin refurbishment. This will be our first opportunity to actually re-chassis an ambulance. So they will actually take our ambulance as it is. They will unbolt the box in the back. They will slide a new chassis underneath it, and they will bolt it back down. They will repaint, touch up, fix everything that we've asked them to do, which Division Chief Mazulis has worked very hard to make sure that we get the highest quality improvements to our ambulance for the price that we have. My question to Ed was, is everything taken care of that we're supposed to take care of, and will these ambulances function like the one we just bought, last year? And he said, we are dialed in and ready to go, and I'll let Ed say a few words if he'd like.
Essentially, the cost of the refurb substantially reduced costs compared to buying a new ambulance, and with the refurbishment, what we've done is the layout of the box, the back of the ambulance, are all very similar. With the exception of some of our older units from the 2008 series, are missing some of the new standardized items we've put on our ambulance: backup cameras, LED packages to reduce or increase the battery life, and a little bit different suspension that improves safety and drivability of the ambulances and comfort for patients. So this refurb will dial in an older ambulance that isn't spec'd like the newest ones we've purchased and bring it into the fleet for quite a few years to come.
And Ed, is this a 4-wheel drive chassis?
The current chassis is 2-wheel drive. It will be going to 4-wheel drive, which we discovered last round is the standard, and Sedona Fire was special ordering 2-wheel drives. So
So, and to be fair, the 4-wheel drives of today are not the 4-wheel drives of before.
No.
They get out lock hubs and do different things like that. Now it's a push of a button and things like that. So there's been some dramatic technological improvements over time that make a 4-wheel drive ambulance. Also the economy of driving them is different, I think, as well in today's push button 4-wheel drive mode versus the old 4-wheel drives and the way they operated. So.
And it gives us the flexibility in snow and inclement weather. With the increase of backcountry stuff, the different suspension we went to now is a hydraulic suspension versus an airbag suspension, and it allows all our ambulances to, with a push of a button, get a 3-inch suspension lift in the rear end to navigate our off-road environment and gets our equipment back safer without scraping the bottom out of it.
Ed mentioned that it's lower cost. Our last ambulance was about $185, I think.
I believe so.
Something around that price. So we're saving with the tax. It's $130,000 for the refurbishment, and there's the $11,000 in taxes is what this bill is going for. So taxes. So you're talking $40,000-$50,000 savings for us to go this way. This was what we set forth. You guys set this thing in motion long before I got here as far as the game plan. So this ambulance that we're getting rid of has got 156,000 miles or something like that. So it's got a lot of hard miles on them. That's just 156,000 miles. Some might not find that to be a lot, but on an ambulance, getting the drive time that those get, that's a lot of miles. And so we're quite happy with what we've gotten out of our ambulances, but we're also excited to move on to the next phase and give this a shot. Open any questions?
I think we really appreciate the effort that you've gone to save that level of money and still have a modernized ambulance. So I'd like to go ahead and make the motion to approve purchase order 10613 in an amount not to exceed $141,000 to Braun Northwest to re-chassis an existing SFD ambulance.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. And Gabe, it's your turn on our financial report.
Just switch these PowerPoints over here real quick.
Chief, a quick question for you. The rescue ambulance fleet, in relation to the last motion, are we almost there with all of the ambulances being rechassied, or is it an ongoing periodic process?
We have an ambulance chassis. I don't know if you can hear me now. We have an ambulance chassis process. I forget what the frequency is now going forward. We will be rechassising the next ambulances, and actually, in many cases, we very well may be able to it'll be outside of my fire chief tenure most likely, but we could rechassis again another one of these boxes if the Braun product holds up and run another turn. So that's where the value gets. In inner city ambulances that run all over the place, they can rechassis 3-4 times on a box, depending how long this lasts. With us not having any rust issues here, certainly has that potential. Back where I came from, it wouldn't be as likely because of the corrosion that occurs. It's, I don't know how many we got. Is that every other year we're doing we have I forget the capital plan, but it's in there. That's part of that 28.4 million is these ambulance rechassis, and we have 7 ambulances right now. So
We have 7 ambulances. One's not a Braun Northwest, but the rest of them, yeah, like you mentioned, the boxes, other than some tree branch scrapes and things like that, the boxes stay in really good shape. And a couple of our ambulances, one that we're rechassing was the 08, and it's when Ford switched their motor, and they've had international chronic issues with it, and the newer 3 that we've purchased since 13, I think we'll get quite a few more miles out of them before rechassis, because the quality of Ford's chassis has improved so much that, and the boxes, they hold up. They're all aluminum construction, and they're really well built.
you remember my comment earlier about the 10-year capital plan and how priorities change and things change. If these chassis hold up, an extra year or 2 longer than we expected, that just slides out those expenses 2 more years. We don't know that till we get there. So those are the type of things. That's a flexible plan. When people look at the numbers, it can be they can be changed, and it might be that we have another bad run and we actually have problems sooner than we expected and have to go the converse of that. So,
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the board, you have the July financial report in your packet. Not too much to talk about from a financial perspective in July. It's obviously the first month of the fiscal year. So revenues are low, and then typically expenses are low. We did receive $71,298 from property tax revenue for the month. Realize when we receive tax revenue in this month, it's usually prior year levy on people paying slow or delinquent accounts revenue coming in. Non-levy revenue was at $196,682. And the biggest reason why we're over our projection on that is the non-district fires or wildland revenue. Understanding that the net profit from those is what gets recorded over to the general fund. Personnel expenses for the month were $726,836. We were under budget by about $300,000, and the reason for that being our accrual of our previous year's payroll. So we had already made the accrual for the financial statements for audit prep, and that's why that first payroll that we actually paid out in July was accrued back to last fiscal year, and that's why we see that variance there. Vehicles and equipment, utilities, managerial expenses are over slightly for the month, but that's due to some first-time payments, and then capital and contingency at $40,658. So we are seeing our total expenses for the month were just over $1 million, where our budgeted was $1.3 million. One thing I will point out that we did pay out that isn't recorded as an expense for the organization is as the board had recommended, we pay out on the Parker Hall excess contribution. So that has been paid out, but it's actually recorded on our financial statements as an asset because we've paid it, but now we'll receive credit on our PSPRS, which will then reduce that down, and we'll be able to track it to know when we've fully been reimbursed, essentially from PSPRS standpoint. Percentage of expenses, you can see personnel at 77% for the month, followed by capital and contingency at 10, operations at 8, and managerial at 6%. Where we are from a year-over-year cash position, you'll see we ended the month, I should say, at $3.9 million compared to $3.3 million last year. So we are over by about $560,000 year over year. but also take into account there's 700,000 that we paid out for PSPRS, which is coming back to us. So really, we're to our fund balance has grown quite well year over year between last year and this year. We do see that increase in kind of those other asset section because of that PSPRS payout. And then finally, liabilities have increased mainly due to transfer of funds between the non-district fire fund account and the operating fund account. Like I said, July is kind of a slow month from a finance perspective. Pam has started working on audit prep stuff, and we'll continue that. We are scheduled to have the auditors on site in October, so we will be working on preparing for that through the next couple months. And unless there's any other questions, that concludes the finance report.
Any questions? Nope. Do you need a motion to approve the report?
I move to approve the financial report for July of 2017.
Second that.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, Chief, your report.
All right, Board, my report has been filed there with you, the opportunity to review it. 408 calls for the month, taking us to 2599 for the year-to-date calls. Average response time over the this year is 621. Enhancement and improvement in the response time year-to-date. And I think for the most part, you're seeing. What's interesting, I was looking at the calls, and I look at the rescue and EMS calls being down by 160 calls, and then the inter-facilities being down also by 100 calls. That's something we're just looking at, and again, from a prevention standpoint, that's what we want to do. We want to minimize the number of people getting hurt and sick, right?
We want to minimize the people getting hurt and sick in our town. That's one of our charges. The downside of that is the fiscal side of that and the revenue that's generated. So it's kind of I like it, but I'm not sure I like it. So we need to be watching that trend with our ambulance revenue and our projections, how that's going to play out net. I think we'll, and then the service load that goes with that, and how that impacts our preparedness level. I would say that we're continuing to have many multiple calls where we're out of units frequently, and so the numbers are down. I could only imagine if they were up, where how more often that would even be. So the way the calls are coming in and the complexities of calls. So that's the call summary. Are there any questions at all? It's 10 backcountry calls as well in those numbers.
I just noticed that there's quite a jump in the false call.
In the which one?
From false alarm, false call.
Yeah, we're going to talk to John about that. I don't have necessarily a reason. I would say what happens sometimes in these situations. That I know in this case that month we actually had a property that had multiple alarms go off over a couple days. So they had a problem with their system, and so we ended up responding a few times to that one incident. John and I spoke last week about a false alarm policy and the interest to try to curtail some of those type of things. So that could be more of a I don't say a blip, but I mean it could have been isolated to one or two properties. We had a lot of lightning, so it looked back historically. A lot of times with that lightning, power failures, surges will send false alarms for alarms too. So we may see that every July we have a spike like that. If I was to look holistically, I don't know that to be true, but that could be. So
Thank you.
grants. I don't know where the ADEQ, I can't believe that's not funded yet, because I think they called us and asked for a bunch of stuff, so I thought that would be funded long ago. We're checking almost every day, just hoping that we're going to get the email that says we got the Type 3 brush truck. We'd love to get the mobile radios, but I really want the brush truck if I had my choice. So we'll see how that goes. We could get all three, or we could get the Niles for all of them. So I think last year or two ago, we were right to the end. I thought maybe, and then they just went, nope, sorry. You didn't make the cut. So they're keeping me on edge for sure. And so with that, you'll see that the documentation class and the car seat, actually both were funded, so we got $6,000. You'll see that next month's report. It just happened yesterday or the day before, but we got $800 from Walmart and $6,000 from Names for our class. So again, cost-saving opportunities for us as a district, and the things that I think Gabe mentioned that we're doing on a daily basis. And back to Mr. Soto's question, we're constantly looking for ways to remove cost burdens to our taxpayers. The incident count by station, we had some issues with trying to get that pulled, and so it's under construction as we sit, and I don't know where we are to get that done, but we're working on it. So we'll try to do that breakout for there. Donations, $100 from the family and $1,580 from the NPS group. So that's that. Community risk, I'd like to have John talk a little bit there. Anything you got to say?
The chief did mention the false calls. I'm quickly learning there are some unique circumstances here in Sedona that I didn't have to deal with in the Northwest. But there were 2 properties last month that we did have quite a few false calls at. Both of those properties were alarm system malfunctions. One of the properties, it was every time it rains, they've got a leak, and it leaks on one of their heads, and I come to find out this is an issue that's been going on for a couple of years. So we're working with them to get that taken care of so we're not dealing with this same problem next year. So I will probably be coming to you sometime in the near future with a false call policy that I would recommend that we adopt, but that's in the future. Other than that, things are going well. We're moving through the process of hiring the community paramedic, community risk management position. We had 2 applicants for that.
Internal?
Internal applicants for that position. We have met with one. We're meeting with the other one tomorrow morning, and then in the next week or so, we're going to continue with interviews and testing process, and we should have that in place probably by the 1st of the month. Yeah. So that's what's going on in CRM.
Couple of hotel projects going on.
Oh yeah,
Busy?
yeah. That's right. We've had some conceptual plan reviews submitted for 189 unit hotel project down in the village at the corner of Jack's Canyon and 179. There's also another fairly large. It's really in the early stages at the Biddles, the old Biddles property, and there's also been some talk of an apartment complex just east and to the south of the Relics restaurant, that large lot that kind of wraps around there. So there's a lot of buzz about projects that are coming down the pike, and as I learn more, I'll keep you advised.
Question, is Relics included as part of that apartment project? I noticed there's a for sale sign on that property.
I had heard that it's for sale. It's not as part of the proposed apartment complex. Rick, the fire inspector, was out at the apartment complex last week, and the owner of that apartment complex is aware that Relics is for sale and would like to do something to add it to his property. So where that issue is, I don't know, but yeah, it is for sale. It's totally separate from the proposed apartment complex, but the one lodging establishment nearby is aware of that. So
Training report. We got 2 guys, Richard Wynn and Nick Granata, who we swore in 12 months ago, or completed their probationary period. It's pretty cool to watch these guys learn and grow over the 12 months. They've got a task book they have to do, and it's very labor intensive for them and for their crew to get them through their task book. When they're done, they have a must-pass test, and so pretty stressful stuff. But we got two great guys that are now off probation, and I think a couple of them said, wow, we got all these other guys we've hired. I'm like 10 guys deep on the seniority list there. This is pretty cool. I said, you're still a new guy, okay? So fun stuff there. we got training officer Michael Duran back here who's been patient enough with his wife Claudia, who has stayed to enjoy this wonderful meeting, and we really want to recognize Mike Duran. Mike Duran's been our training officer for about the last 5 years. One of the most passionate people that works here, as far as I can see, is his interest in training and taking care of the business on the training end of our operation. Johnny on the spot on a lot of different things, but to take that to the next level, he's achieved a very established award. The Commission on Professional Credentialing has awarded him the Chief Training Officer designation. I understand that he's one of 109 in the world. So congratulations, Mike. And anything you want to say? You want to come up and say anything at all? Give him a microphone if you want. Just he wants to say anything about it. Mike, give Mike a mic.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank my wife, Claudia, and my family for supporting me in all this, because none of this would be doable. But my supervisor, Chief Mazulis, has been inspiring me to move forward with some of these credentialing. And this credentialing is really important because it takes all the things they want you to write about yourself and how you've completed 13 competencies following the NFPA standards. So you take a good look on some of the things I've completed here since Chief Kazian has hired me. I came in a year after him, and the support from your board members on this credentialing. So I think it's important as part of the program we're going through with the credentialing of the whole department in the future. And my goal is in the future is maybe getting company officers and other members to go through this credentialing process. Thank you.
So currently, I believe our only credentialing officers are Chief Pichura and myself are both Chief Fire Officers, and so we're part of that program as well. I think we're in the category of about 1,000 Chief Fire Officers in the world again. So thank you, Michael. You can sit unless you want to stand. You're welcome to stand if you like. Oh, 400. 104. So that credentialing, the benchmarking that we take, we're looking at accreditation, right? We're in this looking in period and trying to figure out how we can, well, not figure how, but in the process of looking at accreditation for the Sedona Fire District. And this credentialing model that they have for these different positions. There's one for Chief Medical Officer, I'm sure Chief Mazulis is working on. There's
It's on the list.
a company fire officer, chief fire officer. These are all processes that are internationally recognized that are extremely difficult to achieve and then maintain. So every 3 years, I have to go through a process to say that I'm still doing what I'm supposed to be doing and that I'm involved in the things I'm supposed to be involved in and things like that. So it's pretty intense. And so when Michael completed that, it's the 104th person to go through that. It says something about Sedona Fire District. It says something about Michael Duran and certainly Claudia too. And so very proud of Michael and for our organization to make that list. So Tammy Sherman went to an Esri group, so that's her GIS that she does for us, and so keeping up her goals and things like that. What was kind of interesting is after she went to the conference, she came back and told us that there's just a ton of work being done in the GIS mapping world with drones. And Chief Pichura and I went to a meeting. The college is actually has a drone program, and they were talking about all the amazing things that are happening with drones that they can do, and he talked about the GIS components. They kind of overlapped. I have to tell you, if you're anyone watching this right now and you've got a career ahead of you, it's probably in drones. The things they can do with drones, it's unreal. Our drone that we have, we're still working at it. We still are working on a process because of our proximity to the airport. It makes our drone operations a little bit more difficult than other people. We have to the licensing and the things that we have to do to be safe because of the airport. Make it just not a plug and play like you might go buy one at the store and go play with it, in your backyard or something. We have to be a little more careful because it's a commercial use and things like that. So, but very excited for what our drone can be doing and could be doing for us in the future and neat stuff. So just tying a drone thing in there, but it's not. It's more than just a neat thing. It's actually got the resources are unlimited. And then lastly, the leadership conference was held down in Glendale. Myself, Pichura, Buzz Lakowski in the back there, Brian Espiau, and board member Cooperman attended. I think it was a great program, and well attended, so good stuff there. See our training hours and the important stuff that happens there, good stuff. A little thank you letter from a gentleman, was kind of interesting. We look at his things that he says he learned here, and so, well, he learned that altitude matters at 5,500 feet. Simple hikes are much more difficult and risky. Heat matters, 95 degrees, simple hikes are much more strenuous and risky. Water matters. For a hike of an indeterminate length, must bring water. And age matters. At 66, it's very difficult than when he was 30. And so, you know, it was nice at least to get a, you know, one of those letters back that talks about what we're, you know, what we see and do, and the realization that their people learn their lessons. So he was thankful for our service. The rest of my report, Cottonwood Public Safety Communications Center, lots going on there, good stuff. We had another outage. You know, there's a large spread outage from here to Denver, I think, is where the map showed, where, you know, they cut a line, I believe, in Camp Verde is what I believe I heard on the road project out there. And it took out 911 lines and communicate. Everyone's, there's internet and all kinds of stuff. It took out. And so the vulnerability of the systems and that fiber optic and the lack of redundancies and the infrastructure investments that are being made or had been made are concerning to me as a fire chief. And so we've seen some outages recently on this, you know, one down in New River, right? Remember that 2 years ago or so? This one up here. So it's a problem. And it's not a problem that we can fix necessarily, but it's just something I want you to know about. And we talk about being ahead of the curve and working to be forward thinking, and why we have a reserve engine, and, you know, because they break sometimes. That's why you have a reserve engine. I'd hate to say we're out of engines one day to you. That would be a bad fire chief move. So last thing I'll talk about, 9/11 observance ceremony, station number 6. We'll be having a 9/11 remembrance at 9/11 in the morning. We'll expect probably about a 20-minute, 30-minute presentation at best. We'll have the Sedona Police Department, the Sedona Fire Department, the Sedona Verde Valley Honor Guard there, and we'll put together a little remembrance of the events that happened on September 11th, 2001. Certainly invite all of the public, certainly invite all of you. If any of you would like to say any words, let me know. I'd be glad to give you the mic. Certainly are excited to share our 9/11 memorial site with everybody again. Obviously, a year ago, we dedicated that site with a very large turnout. We are not going to have plans for that large of an event. It will be a simple, remember what happened, a few speakers, opportunity to reflect and go about your business for the day. So it is a Monday. Anyone else have any comments or questions about that? That is all of my report that I remember I'm supposed to talk about, board, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Just a couple more items on the agenda. Discussion possible action. We went through your review process this year, and I think the board decided that it was successful, and we'd like to adopt it as a policy so that we have a formal way of running the evaluation each year. So this is just coming back with the policy that will be put in the board policies. And I would move that we approve Board Policy 2017-01, Fire Chief Annual Evaluation Process as submitted.
Second?
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, board.
And I'll let you take this, Chief.
Sure.
Claim deed.
So last month, we discussed the exciting news about station number 4 and the quit claim deed that was done, or the motion by the Coconino County Board of Supervisors, deeding the property to us. In the process of making that deed occur, they realized that to button it up and do it right, we would need a resolution accepting that quit claim deeds and being willing to take that parcel. So if you have any objections to that, now would be your time to speak. Otherwise, I would prefer someone to make a motion to accept, to have a resolution 2017-10 to accept the transfer of the ownership on parcel number 401-17-019E as in Edward. Upon completion of that resolution, board, we will submit that to Coconino County. They will record the deed, the warranty deed, and transfer that over to us, and we will be the proud owners of station number 4 property as noted.
Yeah, this is an important accomplishment. It's going to allow us to go forward much more easily
Certainly.
when we do address rebuilding Station 4. I'd be pleased to make, I was gonna say so moved, but I'll do it formally and say I move to approve resolution 2017-10 to accept the transfer of the ownership from Coconino County to Sedona Fire District of Coconino County parcel 401-17-019E.
Second?
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, John?
Well, obviously it's back to school time, which brings up the issue of pedestrian safety. And you know, here in Sedona, it's not just about kids and back to school time, although that's important. We have a lot of visitors. That's no surprise to anybody. A lot of pedestrians walking up and down the street, looking at all the beautiful red rocks. A lot of drivers driving down the street, looking at all the beautiful red rocks. And, you know, it reminds me that pedestrian safety is not just an issue for drivers to be concerned about, although as drivers we need to be on the lookout for pedestrians, but also as we ourselves are pedestrians as well, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we are safe pedestrians, using crosswalks, looking both ways. So that's my message this month is with the advent, or with the back to school time of the year, kids are certainly a high priority, and watching out for them walking up and down the streets on their way to and from school. But that's an everyday thing here in Sedona. So just be a safe pedestrian and a safe driver looking for pedestrians.
How about next Monday too? Don't look directly at the sun.
Don't look directly at the sun. That is correct. There will be a Facebook post going out. It directs people to a NASA webpage that talks all about safe viewing of the eclipse. So NASA is an excellent resource on that. So by all means, check out their webpage.
Yes, there is no 5-second rule. on the eclipse.
No 5-second rule.
Probably not even a 2-second rule.
Yeah.
And if anybody has any questions about pedestrian safety.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we have a role model.
Happy to fill you in on
Yeah. And, you know, in that respect, that the crossing, you know, somewhat new of Tlaquepaque North connecting to Tlaquepaque, boy, I feel as a driver, I have to pay close attention to that. It's not that well marked. I mean, it is marked, but not well enough, I feel, for a driver.
be a flashing yellow light, you really should be.
It
because
should.
If you aren't paying any attention, they just start crossing.
Yep.
Okay, on that note, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.